of the big book. And ultimately, it's just a list of doctors that are in support of AA as a medical suggestion for people who are suffering from the disease of alcoholism. And I just really, the herd instinct because of our group really made me smile. So it's the second paragraph on that page 569, because it made me think of how powerful our penguin group is. And just that analogy of taking someone in and putting them in the middle and then circling around them and teaching them and keeping them warm.
So just to add a little bit more to that, hi Jill, grateful recovered alcoholic. This book was, as we know, written almost 90 years ago. And after the book was written, AA started to have a general office and do pamphlets and such. And there's one called Problems Other Than Alcohol. And these pamphlets are really powerful because they tell us that, and this is, Amy and I had a very profound experience as a 12-step with somebody that was suffering desperately from narcotics withdrawal overdose situation. And she was not able to relate to people who were trying to help her from Alcoholics Anonymous because she didn't have a problem with alcohol. Her problems were pretty much drugs alone. So until I have, I guess, a double winner, I have problems with prescription drugs not taken as prescribed, put it that way. And also, as my sponsor says, who also had issues with drugs, well, alcohol was always present. But in her case, it was just drugs. So we have just drugs. We have other societies, Narcotics Anonymous, which is actually where she ended up with the sponsor, or there's Cocaine Anonymous. If you've got a very specific drug addiction and alcohol is not part of your story, you may not relate or identify with the stories that alcoholics are telling. And if you don't have identification, a big part of the power of this program is lost. So if you are a double winner, triple winner like I am, I can cross addict to just about anything. What the medical view on AA is saying is that these doctors are endorsing the program in that they're saying ultimately, and this is what it says, the best results, and go back to, again, 569, Dr. G. Kirby Collier, who was a trustee at one point for AA, said best results can be had under their own guidance as a result of their philosophy. So that's the third paragraph, Dr. G. Kirby Collier. The best results can be had under their own guidance as a result of their philosophy. Well, what is the philosophy? That we need a spiritual solution. And we don't get there with step one, which is what we've largely been talking about up to this point in page 43. We've been talking about how we come in here raw. And all we really want to know is, how do I stop drinking? I'm desperate. And so we start with, can you recognize that you have absolutely no power over alcohol, that alcohol is your higher power, that you are powerless? That's the first part of the step one that we've been dealing with. And then we go to unmanageability. And to recap what we've been doing for the past few weeks, we've been using examples, as Bill has written, of these different extreme individuals, from jaywalkers to car salesmen to whatever, as illustrations, not because you have to identify specifically with their circumstances, but that you can understand that the problems that are going on in your life are originating from alcohol or drugs being your higher power. It's not a separate thing. And once we realize that, geez, all the things I'm blaming, my partner, my job, the economy, it's everybody else's fault. These are things I'm drinking and using they're actually originating from the fact that I have no control whatsoever once I let my mind go there and start the mental looping and the obsessive thinking, and then ultimately the physical craving if we act on that. And that's because we have a disease. Every one of us in here has a disease. And we have an enzyme that does not process ethyl alcohol. We're not bad people. But once we take that first drink, the drink takes us, or whatever substance it is that we're getting ourselves into. And for me, it was whenever emotions got too much and I have difficult time, and I still struggle with processing people because I started drinking, and they say where our development is arrested emotionally from the age and time when we start drinking, because we don't acquire the social skills and the understanding that other people have. But this book, no matter what stage we're at in our life, no matter what our upbringing is, gives us, as the doctors here, as a result of their philosophy. And as we move into step 2 and 3, we're going to discover there's a spiritual solution. And at age 60, you introduced me to that. And my life has just become better and better as a result of that. But even if you've got a relationship with a higher power, or you have a religious foundation, this book is going to introduce you to a way of having a relationship with something higher than yourself that is going to give you the ability to not drink and use. And that's where a lot of us are at. We just don't want to do it anymore. So with that, let's turn back and start chapter 4. So we're on page 44. And we're now into we agnostics. And this is where we address everybody that hasn't got a higher power, or where we start to define for ourselves what a higher power is. And it took me a long time to begin to understand this, but hopefully tonight we're going to get a little bit more insight into that. Okay, Amy, do you want to carry on with the signing reading, and we'll kick her off?
Yeah, sure. Does anybody want to kick us off reading? Anybody want to volunteer? Shauna, it's all
I'll
yours.
volunteer. Hi, I'm Shauna. I'm an alcoholic. And so chapter 4, we agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer.
So let's just stop there for a second. So let's break this down. What is the title? We agnostics. And we're going to see this throughout the program. You know, it's we of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not an I program. You've got an entire community to lean on and support you. You need never be alone again. And in the preceding chapters, they were talking about the cravings, and they were talking about the actual, mental obsession and physical craving. Here we're talking about the concept of the higher power. Now, here's something I think that's quite clever. You already have a higher power if you've come into these rooms. What you might not recognize is that your higher power is alcohol. If you drank like I did and used like I did, a very big part of my day was making sure that I had what I needed to get me going in the morning, keep me going where I thought I needed to be during the day. Anything bumpy that came along, I had something to reach out for, so that I thought I was controlling my emotions and the way I reacted to people. In fact, what I'd done is turn my life over to a substance. Does that make sense to you guys? So we already have a sense of what a higher power is, because every single day it was the same damn routine. What have I got? Have I got enough? Have I got to get a prescription refilled? Have I got to go get whatever I've got to get? Have I got my stash somewhere? Or, and I'd forget where some of it was, and then I'd come across it again. There was a huge amount of energy and time spent sustaining my alcoholism and my addiction. Well, what is that? It's a form of a higher power. So if you imagine this, if you take that energy that you've been putting into sustaining this thing that is ultimately having you wake up every day or do whatever you're doing, and you feel that sense of self-loathing and shame, and we're creating that from the energy we're putting into the higher power of a substance. So what this is saying is, and I've highlighted this last sentence, it's very powerful. If that be the case, so if you're in here in this meeting, you've already figured out you might have a problem, okay? But what is the solution? And it says you may be suffering from an illness which, circle it, there's only one answer to this. And believe me, I've tried all the other ones. Only a spiritual experience will conquer. So we've got only, this is the only answer, and certainly for me, it's the only thing that's worked. A spiritual experience, and we're going to get into that more and more in this chapter, and then look at that beautiful word, conquer. What does conquer mean? To slay, to eliminate. Imagine the freedom that comes from having this taken out of your life. Okay, so that's how we can do. Now, the other thing I just want to pop out here is, why is this called we agnostics? Okay, an atheist, and you can write this down if you're not clear on what this is one who does not believe in the existence of God. There is no God, point blank. Okay, that's an atheist. An agnostic is one who believes the existence or non-existence of God cannot be proven or known. In other words, you're sitting on the fence. It's like, well, it might exist, it might not exist. And that is why Bill chose the word agnostic over atheist, because he's saying if we can crack open the individual to just think maybe there's a chance that there's something bigger than our individual ego, then we've got an in-way to finding a spiritual solution. And I just want to clarify before we go any step further, this is not about religion. Okay, this is not about believing in a certain deity or a certain God or a certain type of religion or denomination. This is about a spiritual program, and it's only about figuring out something that there's bigger than you individually. And if you're an alcoholic like I was, I'm still an alcoholic, but I realized today that there's a lot that's bigger than Jill. Okay, let's carry on with the reading.
I'll carry on for a bit if you like. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety, especially if, to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face.
Okay, so let's just pause there for a second. To be doomed to that sentence, I've highlighted it. And for me, this is the step 2 definition. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Okay, so let's just pause for a second here. And can somebody find and read out what step 2 is? Somebody read step 2. So first of all, if you don't know where it is, you need to have in your big book in How It Works, which is chapter 5, which starts on page 58. I have a big tab on page 59 that says 12 steps. Because if you're not at a meeting and you haven't got the 12 steps written right in front of you, it's very easy to forget what the steps actually are. So carry on, Shauna, go to 59 and read what steps 2 says.
Okay, so step 2 is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity.
Okay, so it's a process. Came to believe. Oh, go ahead, Honest John. You want to pop in here?
Good evening, Honest John, recovery member, Alcoholics Anonymous. Some I want to point out to you, because I didn't believe this program worked. Now, if you go to the paragraph before, like it says right here, if that be the case, you probably alcoholic. And see, he set up, that's a drunk trap for a person to doubt himself. And man, this guy, he's a classic writer, and he do it so wonderfully. Now he talking about this part here. He talking about the obsession of the mind. We finna go into this obsession of the mind because, like, from the doctor's opinion to page 23, it's the physical craving. From 23 to 43, he talks about the obsession of the mind. Now he's finna go into how the process works. Just like you broke it down, Jill, explaining the atheist and agnostic. Now you finna see what a spiritual life finna come in about. That's all I want to say.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And so that's how we're moving. You know, step 1 doesn't talk about God. Step 1 doesn't talk about a power greater than ourselves. It's just dealing with the fact that we're admitting that we're powerless over alcohol. Unmanageability in our life is coming from our alcoholism. Step 2 is taking us into this really special place where we start to understand there's actually a solution. So as you were saying, Shauna, came to believe it's a process. Mm-hmm. I didn't have a white bolt lightning experience like Bill did. Mm-hmm. I mean, Honest John and Johnny Mac know full well how much convincing but took to that there was anything that was bigger than Jill. And that is what we're working on here. Let's just open our mind. And again, remember what Amy was saying about the set-aside prayer. Come in here with an open mind. Forget about all the other stuff you've heard in rehab and meetings and all the rest of it. And let's just get our head around the fact, for me, it's a fact, that there's something bigger. And that if I learn in this process, coming to believe, wow, do you know the weight you're going to have lifted from your shoulders? Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, it's not about you or up to you. And the guilt and the self-loathing and the feeling like this was all down to me and it was a matter of self-will and somehow I was a bad person because I just couldn't stop this on my own, no matter how hard I tried, that was removed from me. Mm-hmm. Because these words are telling us that you can come to believe if you open your mind, set aside your prejudices and what you think you know about yourself and alcoholism, is that you can come to be restored to sanity. Because let's face it, the way we're living when we're active in our disease, it's insane. What other disease tells you in your own voice to do the very thing that you know is going to kill you? And does it so convincingly that as soon as you feel wobbly, you go back and do it over and over and over again. Okay, let's carry on.
Okay. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted.
Okay, so let's just take a look at the beautiful message there. I've highlighted the third sentence there. Face the fact, and Bill doesn't choose his words by error. Face the fact. I mean, here's the truth. I'm laying it out right here for you that we must, he's not saying maybe, kinda, must find, and again, that goes back to the process, okay? We must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. Now, what's the or else? And you'll see he's going to say this to us many times. We're going to die. And that's a fact. We know that. It's just something about my alcoholism tells me that I'm not going to. Something else tells me that that happens to other people, that I can go out and drink and use again. And yeah, Ron's just thumbs up. I mean, that somehow I'm different. Somehow I'm not like you drunk. Somehow I'm that bit brighter that I'm going to stop, or something's going to intervene. So I'm not going to wake up. Guess what? You hang around this program long enough and you see how many of these squares in the Zoom rooms go dark because people can't get this program, or they can't sustain this program, or they can't admit what's happened and come back to this program. That's the reality. And also, we all know what's out there on the streets these days. If it's not just alcohol you're messing around with, everything that is out on the street is uncertain. And again, I'll use the analogy here I've shared before, because we got some newcomers in here, and this was powerful for me. I was crying out for help, but I didn't realize it. And I damn near died from this. And I know you'll hear some people say, oh, I think I've got one last drink in me, or I've got one last party in me. Who am I to think that I'm going to come back from that party? And I analogize it to standing on a windowsill and crying for help. I'm going to jump off. I'm going to jump off. And I don't really want to die, but I want the attention. I want people to know I'm suffering. And then a gust of wind blows up and blows me off. You don't know if you're going to choke on your own vomit and die, if you're going to take something that's laced with something else. So this is a deadly disease. And that's what he's saying here in the or else. Okay, let's carry on.
Does anybody else want to volunteer to read? Melissa, you got it. So we're at the bottom of page 44.
But it isn't so difficult, that's where?
Next one.
If a mere code.
If a mere code of moral.
If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such code and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly.
Okay, so
Lack
let's
of
break.
power.
Hang on one second, Melissa. Let's just break this
Okay.
down. So, if a mere code of morals. Okay, so this goes back to just saying, you know, if you're just a good person, if you do everything that's told, that you do what you're told, if you just followed some rules and you were then a good person, that would combat alcoholism. Everybody would do it that way. And it says we would have all recovered long ago. But we found that these codes or philosophies, these rules, they didn't save us no matter how much we tried. So it's not about willpower. It's not about being given a list of do's and do not do's that is going to get us through this. it says, no matter how, like, we can read Buddhism, we can read any type of religious text and try live by those rules. But at the end of the day, this isn't about being a good moral person. This is about having a disease, a real disease, a bona fide disease. We are sick. And our mind is going to tell us to keep doing this. That's part of the disease. It affects us mentally as well as physically. So once I accept that, I am relieved of a great responsibility that I can think my way through this program. It's not about good or bad. It's not about being a good person or a bad person, as it's saying here. It's not a philosophy. It's not a moral thing. And here's where I've highlighted. So on page 45, the sixth sentence down, the needed power wasn't there. And the needed power is the power that is greater than yourself. Does that make sense? There is no way your self-will, your determination, your I'm never going to do this again is going to get you through this program, because that's not the program. The program is finding something that is bigger than you, that you can lean on, that you can trust, that you can turn to. And what we're going to introduce you to is to develop your own concept of what that is. You don't have to accept anybody else's version of what a higher power is. And I couldn't, because I couldn't get my head around it. But and for me, as I've shared many times, it started with trees. I believe trees are they're living, growing things, and they have an energy that I can't explain. And the mountains and the river and the animals, I can get my head around that's bigger than Jill. And then that opened me up to the idea of a power greater than myself. And then, so the needed power wasn't there. This isn't your responsibility to figure this out by yourself. Then it says, our human resources as marshaled by the will. What does that mean? Just self-will. I can't do this as a human being just trying to not drink and not use. It's just not possible. And then he says, we're not sufficient. It's not possible to do this just on willpower. And then he says, they failed utterly, completely. You may stay sober for a while, but if you haven't got a spiritual program, at the end of the day, you will I encountered over and over again something bigger than me that took me back to where I started, even though I had been sober for extended periods. Yeah, thanks, Ron. Like, you guys get this? It's not about you being a bad person and trying to do this on your own. It's a we program. And that's also when we get into, okay, what's a higher power? If you believe I have a power, borrow mine. Because I never used to have one, until you figure out what yours is, or let this group be your higher power. Whatever you can wrap your head around that is bigger than just you. Okay,